but we all know that politics is downstream from culture. And if these people are able to change the culture, then I think we could see a future where 10, 20 years down the line, the 35% of Jews who voted for Trump could end up reconsidering to be, being Democrats again. Who knows?
Welcome back to
Ami's House.
We are here with Karys Rhea, commentator, journalist, who's been working on an interesting book that's covering kind of the latest developments in the woke right of center fracturing and how everything is falling apart, and we need to make some sense of it. Karys, welcome to Ami's House. Welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. So can you just tell us a little bit about how, we had James Lindsay on a few weeks ago where we were really digging into what was happening on the right, and this has become the subject of the conversation if you get into the weeds about how things have been fracturing for a long time. And it was sort of like Douglas Murray saying, what do you do with your victory? And there's a flare that goes up and you kind of see who's around in this big MAGA umbrella, America First umbrella. Just tell us a little bit about what you've been tracking as you've been seeing it and some of the troubling things you've been seeing on the right.
So I kind of noticed the signs of this early in, it was 2022. And I think the reason why I started to see that something was off was because I had grown up in the Bay Area, which is probably the wokest part of the country. And so I was very sensitive as a conservative and later a MAGA conservative to just the whole ideology and behavior and values of the progressive left that even before I knew I was a conservative didn't sit well with me growing up. The whole mob mentality and the embrace of victimhood and the intersectional hierarchy and all that kind of stuff. And so when that started happening within my own camp of the, under the big tent of MAGA, America First, Trump Republicans, it was horrifying because I've been fighting this stuff on the left for 15 years. And now I find myself fighting it within my own camp. And it's very, very disturbing because it didn't take that many people to hijack the Democratic Party. And I feel like if we don't wake up and see what's happening, then the same thing could happen to the Democratic Party.
Could you take one step back and just give an example of victimhood and hierarchy on the right now? What's going on there, in case someone's not paying close attention?
Well, I think that the whole phenomenon of what you would call the woke right, or the dozens of other names that people have given to this crowd, is similarly based on a hierarchy of victimhood, except instead of the queer, indigenous people of color that are the most entitled because they're the most victimized, on the right, it is the white Christian males, right? And so it's just kind of a reverse, the two different sides of the same coin. But in 2022, I noticed it with regards to the anti-Semitism and the anti-Zionism that is unique to both to both groups on the left and the right. One of the reasons why we call them the woke right. I noticed it in an episode of Tucker Carlson before he left Fox. And I was such a huge fan of Tucker during the pandemic. His monologues were a lifeline for me. They were really, really valuable. And once I had gone back home, I wasn't watching him as much, but I saw that he did that interview with Kanye West. And at that point, nobody really knew how anti-Semitic Kanye was. Like, there was inklings, but it wasn't public like it later became. And yet I found out from, I think it was Vice News, that Tucker had cut out the parts of the interview where Kanye was saying blatantly anti-Semitic things. And Tucker, in his monologue at the beginning of the interview, was endorsing this guy, was saying, people think Kanye West is crazy, but listen for yourself. He's just a good conservative with traditional family values, right? And so that was the first moment that I started questioning Tucker Carlson's motives or values.
And censorship.
So we'll cut that out. Yeah, exactly. It's so that one of the saddest parts of it is I remember for years, like Jordan Peterson, I've been impersonating him for a long time and doing shtick, but like he was screaming from the rooftops during peak woke leftist identity politics in 2014, 15, 16 about if you keep playing this game of identity politics and saying that one's group identity is paramount, and then saying that white males are at the bottom of that, eventually they're going to play this game, and you're going to see a backlash of the white identitarian right, and it will not be pretty. And say what you want about the woke left excess, and as ugly and annoying as it was, this thing that we're seeing now, where it's a white identitarian nationalism that's on the rise, unapologetic anti-Semitism, the things you can say about Jews now casually, the mainstreaming of it is exactly as predicted. And it's just interesting. You see these like reactionary movements where once you hit like a peak woke left excess where you can't say anything, now you're saying, oh, let's say everything. Sure. And let's just play with the most edgy, dangerous ideas, whether we mean it or not. And the aftermath of that is this pure transgressive society where you're confusing principles of free speech with what you should say versus what you're legally allowed to say, and it's all muddled together, and no one can understand each other. So I just think you're giving the left the caricature that they've been putting on the right-wingers for so long. You're just a bunch of racist white supremacists, and rather than sticking to principle and disputing that, they're saying, yeah, we are. I'm like,
let's become the racist white supremacists. Yeah, and I really want to say, I remember those days when you would do your Jordan Peterson impressions with Tyler Fisher, because I lived in New York City with him and went to a few of his shows, and so before I even knew that you were Jewish, I would follow your comedy. From abroad, but yeah, I mean, I think that's a perfect. I think that's a perfect illustration of how the pendulum swings. I mean, we see that with the whole manosphere culture, right? I mean, you see these ridiculous terms that the left assigned men, like toxic masculinity, right? And like whiteness, right? Not as like a race, but as like a sort of like temperament or something that even you could even be black, like Larry Elder, you'd be the black face of white supremacy, right? And now you're seeing with the whole manosphere and incel culture and Andrew Tate and Myron Gaines, the exact extreme backlash where I hate to say it, but they are totally practicing toxic masculinity. Like, I can't believe that I would ever use these leftist terms. So, but it's almost like the left it's almost like the left manifested it, right? Yes. And then you see the exact same thing with the anti-Semitism and the scapegoating, right? You see these poor males who have been, they've been beaten down for so long, and just like a whole generation, 2 generations that like are basically so economically shortchanged, and they need somebody to blame. And as we know from history, there's no better scapegoat than the Jews or the Zionists, as it's more appropriate to say these days.
Right. So in the interest of trying to get cooler heads to prevail, like one of the things Michael and I have been trying to do throughout navigating this space and talking about how to talk about these issues, right? Because anti-Semitism, Israel, Zionism, like all of this stuff has become the center of pop culture, which is really unusual. But in a post-October 7th world, it's just so front and center. And there's been this like pile-on effect that's been happening where it's sort of like the world piles on Israel, the world piles on Jews, and then also like our side in a vulnerable state piles on the people we feel are piling on, and it just constantly elevates and goes back and forth and escalates. But I think we're at a point now where we need to figure out better ways to have this conversation, because like you said, like when you smear people, when you, when the woke left for so long puts people down or calls them names or designates them as something, they can become that thing. And that's what I see some of the mainstream people in this space. We were talking about, people like Megyn Kelly, Charlie Kirk, the people in sort of that who helped build this bigger sort of MAGA movement are now seeing this. And we're trying to figure out like how to properly have these conversations that are kind of close to the edge. But if you smear people with the same labels and use anti-Semitism or racism too loosely, you don't want to push people further into those corners, but you also don't want them to not have accountability. So what are the better ways that we can have these conversations without resulting to leftist tactics?
Let's play the clip actually that you're talking about, because I think it's a pretty good illustration of how a lot of the piling on of our community calling people anti-Semitic is being seen by the outside.
You and I are both supporters of Israel and have defended Israel since the beginning of this conflict, and spoken out about the anti-Semitism that has erupted on these college campuses many, 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 many times. And something's happening though with this whole debate that is really bothering me, and I wonder if you're feeling it too. So I mean, I genuinely believe you'd be hard pressed to find somebody in the public eye who's been as outspoken a defender of not every move Israel's taken in the war, but of Israel's right to defend itself and of the just backward awfulness that we've been seeing on college campuses and the backlash against American Jews than yours truly. I mean, I have been at the pointy end of the spear on this, and
I completely agree with that.
And it was all heartfelt, and it remains heartfelt.
Yes.
However, my contention here is that some in the pro-Israel camp are so knee-jerk about calling you anti-Semitic or getting deeply offended if you say anything that doesn't align with their narrative, that it undermines their own cause. And I have to tell you, I find it very irritating because I do feel like some of us have earned the right to have some credibility on the subject of Israel and don't want to be called those names when we have some mild pushback on some of the overreaches, whether it's, whether they're winning or losing the propaganda war right now. And my contention is they've begun to lose it. And I realize it's propaganda coming at us from Hamas, but their numbers have turned here in America. They've turned, not so much with Republicans, a little bit with Republicans, but completely with the Democrat Party and with independents. They have shifted mightily from at least double digits highs to single digit lows now with when it comes to approval. And also with respect to, you and I speculated about this at the Turning Point event, whether the possibility of Jeffrey Epstein possibly being a Mossad agent or asset or affiliated with, that's been turned around on me too, to you must be anti-Semitic. What the hell? That's such bullshit. The same people who say you can criticize Israel, that's fine. We won't call you anti-Semitic if you criticize Israel. Now turn around immediately and say you're anti-Semitic for even raising that. I completely reject that. And I raise this as a pushback against my friends on that particular strain of the aisle to watch it, because you don't want to alienate people who are openly your friends by going nuts in your crackdowns on mild pushback on anything related to Israel. Now you take it.
I'm so glad you brought this up, and I would second that, Megyn. I think I have a bulletproof resume showing my defense of Israel, both on campus, on social media, to great, let's just say mockery and scorn at times, because I believe it, right? I believe in the scriptural land rights given to Israel. I believe in fulfillment of prophecy. And again, I'm not a theologian, but I'm a Christian. My life was changed in Israel. The spiritual energy is so amazing there. I want them to win. I've said that repeatedly.
Same.
And however, Megyn, you're hitting on something very potent and important. Now, let me first say, I don't want to judge an entire group, because there's been many people in the pro-Israel world that have been very sweet, very kind, very nuanced, very Charlie, you're with us. You don't have to agree all the time. However, and I will say this, the behavior by a lot, both privately and publicly, are pushing people like you and me away. Not like we're going to be pro-Hamas, not like we're going to, but we're like, honestly, the way you are treating me is so repulsive. I have text messages, Megyn, calling me an anti-Semite. I am learning biblical Hebrew and writing a book on the Shabbat. I honor the Shabbat, literally the Jewish Sabbath. I visit Israel and fight for it. And there's another article out in the Times of Israel today. I could read it on air. I was just reading before I got on. Charlie, what are you doing? Like, what am I doing? I'm sorry. Like, let's just take a step back here. Like, I'm an American citizen. Yes, I want Israel to win. Yes, I'm a Christian. But like, some of the mess, and you've seen how I've been treated, Megyn.
Welcome to being Jewish. I think it's a compliment. They're being irritated by other Jews. That's like a stamp of approval, if you ask me. But, Charlie, what are you doing? Any Jewish guy with a Jewish mother knows what that sounds like. So maybe they're getting a little too riled up. But what's your take on that, Karys?
So if I were them and I was being called anti-Semite by Zionists, whether Jewish or Christian, whether online or personal friends of mine, I would be annoyed, and I would probably be like, screw you guys to them. I would not be airing this out on public. I think that's incredibly irresponsible, given the fact that both of you, Megyn and Charlie, say in that interview, maybe not in that clip, I can't remember, how incredibly hostile the situation is right now for Jews. And Charlie has acknowledged that there is a problem also on the right from it. That being said, I think what is most telling about this, and it's not just in this interview, they've said it other places too, including in personal messages that I have seen, in personal text messages, not with me, but with other people.
You were the one who texted him? You are in.
No, I prefer phone calls or just like in move. I mean, honestly, I just prefer to just hold him down. Just kidding.
I don't know, when he put up the phone, I saw a Karys Rhea contact. I have text messages. Yeah. Okay. So what? Yeah, sorry.
I think what's the most telling is the fact that essentially they are threatening these people, and they're saying, if you keep labeling me an anti-Semite, you will lose me. What does that mean? They're not saying you're going to lose me as a friend, which would be perfectly fine. If my friend was, calling me something I wasn't, I would, No, they're saying you're going to lose my support for Israel. And they say that doesn't mean I'm going to support Hamas, but you're going to push me away from Israel. And what that says is that their support for Israel is not that deep. Essentially, it's conditioned on people who ostensibly have nothing to do with Israel, just Jews and Christian Zionists, support of them, right? So they're more offended. They're more offended by the people labeling them anti-Semites than the anti-Semites.
That's a good point. And I know, Ami, you have what to say about that, but let me just
go
say
first.
I'm okay with them not 100% unconditionally supporting Israel. That's their right. What bothered me was their tone of like, we're the only thing standing between you and the rest of the world, right? And like, we can take that away anytime we want. That's like there was this undertone of this conditional support of you as long as you sort of toe this line that we're going to set for you.
Well, it's like, you guys should be grateful for my loyalty.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. But if some online trolls or even some, Zionist friends of mine question my loyalty, I might not give that loyalty to Israel. It's like,
yes,
how that is going to make you lose support for a living, breathing country with 9 million people. It's like they'll fight for the moral high ground in specific instances, but there's no purity of heart there.
Let's do
shallow.
this. You both are making good points. I want to try to read between the lines here, because we're all human beings and everybody is responds to temperament and emotion as much as we all try to be rational actors here. I know it comes across as a warning. I think what I interpret from that messaging is like a practical element, that it's just not pragmatically smart and productive to go after your friends and people who support you with the same vitriol and, passionate condemnation as you would your enemies. Like, and maybe that's something they also have to look to them, is the point that you're making, Karys, is like, is my support really that tacit and surface level that if I get that kind of pushback, even though it's annoying, I'm just going to pull? They're not really saying I'm going to pull my support, but they are making a practical, pragmatic observation that why would you, who are our friends, people who we've supported, react that way to us? There's something that we have, an element of hakaras hatov, an element of gratitude for. I'll just say this, like, the difference between, I think in our community, we take for granted the fact that we have a personal, deep connection to Jews, to Israel, as Jews, as Zionists. We have this personal connection that gives us a certain sense of, call it loyalty as opposed to sympathy. I think there's a difference between loyalty and sympathy. And I'm not blindly loyal, but if my cousin was being attacked, right, and he was a perfectly innocent person, like, I might be first in line to defend my cousin or my brother, and they might be second or third in line. But I shouldn't necessarily expect them to have the exact same relationship and connection in every way to somebody I'm personally connected to. And the fact that they, in spite of not being Jewish or connected in that way, still have been so outspokenly supportive for the most part, the second they veer off course a little bit, and we can talk about why that's happening, but the second they do, it might behoove us and to be not reactionary and not push them further away on an emotional level. Does that make sense?
I agree, but to Karys' point, the way they did it and the way they framed that conversation didn't really get that point across.
It seems like it's reached a threshold. It seems like it's reached a threshold where it's not like the first time they received pushback they did it, but if it's happening repeatedly, they're like, guys, like we're on your side. And I just think another element of this to think about and just to consider is like, look, when you're playing near the edge in these controversial issues, there's people who are off the edge and you can't reach them. But the people who are standing right next to it might not be aware of how close they are to it, and they look like they're on stable ground. And I think that for them, there's this instinct in fighting woke leftism for so long that by virtue of being told not to say something or that something you said is problematic and receiving pushback for it, that gives them an instinct that I think is automatic at this point, having fighting cancel culture for so long, that there must be something true that someone is trying to conceal rather than something dangerous that other people are trying to propagate. That's what we're warning against that. And they're saying, oh, there must be something there. And I think that's a misread. And we need to focus more on the common enemies who ruin the party for all of us, which is the actual anti-Semites. They're creating a climate where we can't talk about things honestly. Anyway.
Well, I agree with you. And in that sense, like I said at the beginning, I have sympathy because if somebody was calling me an anti-Semite and I clearly wasn't, that would really piss me off too. So in that sense, I have sympathy for them. But I think that we should look at Megyn and Charlie not in a vacuum with this clip, but we should people tell you who they are by showing you who they are. And while I would never go so far at this point in time to ever say that Megyn Kelly and Charlie Kirk hate Jews, I will tell you very confidently that they are 100% enablers of anti-Semitism. Just like they will say, no, we would try to fight against it. Absolute nonsense. Okay. And all you need to know that is to look at Megyn Kelly and Charlie Kirk's constant defense, I was even going to say, of somebody like Tucker Carlson. To this day, they will say the words from their mouth publicly. Tucker Carlson is clearly not an anti-Semite, and he has no problem with Israel. Oh, really? 50, 57 or so episodes of his show from 2025, and over half are about Israel or have a segment on Israel? Really? Nothing to do with like Egypt and the persecution of Coptic Christians, right? Who we give over $1 billion to every year. So surely this isn't about foreign aid, right? Nothing about the starving children in Sudan and Yemen. So surely this isn't about starving children in Gaza. I mean,
I don't really want to be involved in it, but yeah.
The thing that bothers me, I am more bothered. I am less bothered by like the guttural Jew hatred that I am seeing from the right, and more bothered by Charlie and Megyn's ability to write it off as fringe criticism of Israel and not connect the dots and essentially just dismiss it and say, yeah, guys, Jew hatred is bad. Everybody knows that. And then be like, Tucker Carlson's not, oh, really? Saying Israel is demonic and a made up state since 1948 is just criticism of Israel? Asserting medieval supersessionist Christian beliefs that the Vatican II has rejected because they have been responsible for countless pogroms and forced conversions and exiles and an inquisition is just criticism of Israel? Are you joking me?
You don't have to convince us, or I don't think even our audience, with regards to a Candace or a Tucker. The question is what their role is.
The point is that they claim the moral high ground, and yet they are able to compartmentalize when it comes to, you know, losing followers, right? Like they'll give up their principles in self-aggrandizing cultural pursuits and be able to exhibit two personalities, right? And I think that that's just like the smugness of the anointed. You essentially use your principles in protection of their in-group identity, and Tucker Carlson is part of that in-group identity. Look, I haven't double-checked this, but somebody told me that Charlie Kirk was still promoting Candace Owens on his website, like it linked to her or something at the bottom. Don't quote me on that, and I would be more than happy to be proven wrong. But if that is the case, then I think that says a lot more at this point about Charlie Kirk than it does about Candace Owens or anyone calling him an anti-Semite.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think if Megyn or Charlie had just met or just seen Tucker Carlson or Candace Owens on the scene starting October 7th, 2023, if these were two new commentators, they would have the same positions they do now on them, or they would be right where you are?
Yeah, no, absolutely they wouldn't, because on the one hand, there's 2 episodes here. There's the personal loyalty of them being friends, right? They're
Right.
good friends, and
Right.
of course that has some sort of cachet. That's a very tough field to navigate. But then there's the fact of just Tucker Carlson's sheer influence, and the fact that if you call out Tucker, whoo, that's a bad look for you. He's got some vicious trolls that come after you.
I'm just separating because you're making it seemed like you were saying this has more to do with clout and followers. I think it has more to do with
Loyalty.
Being corrupted by friendship, by knowing someone for so long. In other words, let's say you know someone personally outside we're getting psychoanalytical here, but if you know someone outside of the avatars that they are online, and you toured with somebody for years and years and years and built a huge conservative movement, and somebody wrote the foreword to your book and you had all these things, that will make you a little bit blinded to the obvious infractions and things that we've seen Tucker do that are very obvious to us, where we're like, what the hell is this? And it's easy for us to call out. And I'm not trying to not hold them accountable, but I'm trying to understand why for them, they have to convince themselves otherwise than what's so obvious to the episodes of Tucker. The things that you just elaborated on, it's like obvious to everyone. And why aren't they seeing it? Is it really because they want the clout and the clicks from Tucker, or they're clouded? I heard an interview with Rabbi Wolpe or something who just said like friendship is one of the most morally corrupting forces. They were asking about Christopher Hitchens, who was famously very anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, more pro-Palestinian, more sympathetic. And they said if Christopher Hitchens was alive today, post October 7th, given how he spoke out against radical Islam, Islamofascism, like how could he have had the positions that he had on Israel-Palestine? It seems so antithetical to that. And somebody asked him that in a private conversation before he had passed away. And he said, I have too many Palestinian friends to revisit this position. Like I have too many people in my life that got to me early enough and basically morally corrupted me because I have these principles, but blood is thicker than water. And when you know people and when you've been through with people, I don't know the extent of Tucker's relationship with Charlie or even Candace and Charlie that deeply, or like how deep it goes in the past. But you can understand why they don't just see this for absolutely obviously what it is. And there's all of us going, what is going on here? And I'm just trying to be impartial to say it can be one of the main impetuses and causes for why there's a blind spot for all of this is personal friendship, because they have no problem calling out people they have no connection to and completely being unequivocally condemning of them.
So I mean, what's a better way forward? Like we've tried to condemn people as anti-Semitic. We haven't, but people do.
We haven't.
What do you think Megyn Kelly and Charlie Kirk want to see from the Jewish community right now?
I mean, I think it's important to, like, discernment is the big thing. Like, if we use anti-Semitism too loosely, Karys, you'd agree, like, it loses all its cultural power as it's been proven. It clouds and creates a whole low-resolution thing that how could Richard Spencer, Megyn Kelly, Nick Fuentes, and Charlie Kirk be the same thing? They're just not. So when I talk about this moral corruption that's creating a blind spot because of friendship and past relationships, I would imagine that's a more gracious understanding of what's going on here, because we're all human beings operating in, like, this actual space, even though we have these avatars online that we're trying to craft. Charlie's built this massive movement that I think he's trying to keep together in a way. And in a way, these are the people that they may be enablers, as you're saying, but they also may be part of the solution too, if it can be shown to them, not from a critical condemnation standpoint, where the problems are. Do you know what I mean? Because otherwise, when you do that, you just push them further into that camp. And Jordan Peterson said something about Joe Rogan's episode with like Ian Carroll as distinct, and like even from Daryl Cooper, he's like, there's a difference between accidentally stepping into somebody else's pathology versus the people purveying and perpetuating a pathology. And like a curious person like Joe accidentally steps into a pathology not knowing who David Irving is. And at that time, I remember when these episodes aired, everyone wanted to call Joe an anti-Semite. We knew you weren't with us. We knew you were bad for the Jews. And I'm not saying Joe is equal in terms of to Charlie or to Megyn. These are different people, but that's the whole thing. They're different people with different levels of awareness.
I just have to tell you, like,
so they might be the solution too.
It's true that you can push people away from this, but some people you can't. And a very good example of that is RFK Jr. Okay, RFK Jr. is somebody who has always been incredibly pro-Israel and a proud Zionist, and yet he has been maligned much in the same way that Trump has been, unfairly, with out of context I mean, I wrote a whole article debunking every single lie, calling RFK anti-Semitic and explaining the context of every single one, and saying not only is he not anti-Semitic, so many of RFK's followers have been traditionally on like the progressive left and have put so much pressure on him to disavow Israel, and he refuses. Like, he doesn't even bat an eyelash. Like, he understands the history. He understands the facts. He understands enough about this conflict to know that no matter who calls him an anti-Semite or who calls him a Zionist shill, it's not gonna shake how he actually feels about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I just have to say, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, he does the same thing with like being anti-vax though. Like, he is like absurdly principled in defending what he believes. Like, most people, I'm not like that. You know, like, most people aren't that talented.
Yeah, but
put that on your dating profile.
But
Not
I
that
think what's
principled.
going. But Karys, I think what's going on in the RFK case is a little different because, Michael, you asked, like, what's the solution? I think reorienting the conversation to correct the misperceptions about this conversation, people like Charlie, Megyn, who are on the right, are viewing this conversation through the lens of cancel culture and free speech that made certain topics, like pre-October 7th, there were topics that if you discussed them, you were called the thing you were discussing. If you discussed race, you were called a racist.
If you
wanted to
vaccines, you were called anti-vax.
Correct.
Of course.
And if we
immigrants, you were an Islamophobe. Yeah, of course.
And it behooves us, it's important on the side of being pro-Israel and Zionist to not fall into that trap of signaling that same MO, that if you talk about this subject in a way that we don't approve, you are the thing you're discussing, or you become part of the nefarious actors. I think we have to really hone in on who the nefarious actors are that are making this conversation impossible. I just want to add, in a pre-October 7th world, if there were other issues, socio issues like race issues you wanted to discuss, problems in the black community, gang violence, things like that, the reason it was so absurd from the left to call people racist talking about it was because I think, in my opinion, Mike, you might not agree, but a lot of the claims of racism going on in the culture were manufactured, that there was this systemic racism, that police were just like massacring people in droves. And therefore we were like, you're being ridiculous. We want to just talk about these issues. But if there were actual black people being lynched in the street, or calls on college campus to kill African Americans, that would have made a conversation about race and culture.
We would have been a little more sensitive.
It would have been very hard to do, and it would be the fault of the violent, nefarious racists that make that conversation hard, not the people who are sensitive to it. And I think what's happening now is in the rise post-October 7th of anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, anti-Semitism being put out there by the Dan Balzerians and the Nick Fuentes being mainstreamed, those are the people that make this conversation difficult, not the emotional reactionary Jews as much as and the emotional reactionary Megyn Kellys and Charlie Kirks. We're going back and forth on each other while they're playing us, because they make this conversation impossible, because we don't know where people's intentions are. Who's polluting the well? It's them.
But
I think that's...
But you also have to ask yourself, look, if Charlie and Megyn are going to bring this talk into the public and not keep it between themselves or with their individual friends that are pissing them off, then we have a right to ask ourselves, what do they know? What do they actually know about what Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson has been saying? Like, do they know that Tucker Carlson praised Sharia law? Do they know that he praised the Taliban? Do they know that he literally has endorsed guests on his shows that have said everything from like Jews celebrate the deaths of children to, like October 7th was a false flag to Jews are responsible for the Armenian genocide? And I mean, it just goes on and on and on, right? And nobody knows how much they know. I mean, I think I said this before, like, I wish that I could do like a Clockwork Orange scenario and put all these people, Megyn, Charlie, and so many others, who I do not believe are anti-Semitic, into just like a locked room where they are forced to just watch clips of actually these people who seemed fairly normal in the past are now saying. And then we would actually have an answer. We would actually know if they continued to promote these people, then we would know, oh, this is maybe they're just corrupted by friendship, or this is about the grift and they are not on our side. Or if, you know, if they called them out, and or if they, even if they had them on their own platforms and they confronted them, you know, but we don't know. And so we have to try to be like charitable and give them the benefit of the doubt. But I just have to say, these clips are not the only thing we're seeing. I mean, Turning Point USA, like, I'm not going to talk about who Charlie Kirk chose to bring on or what they chose to say. My issue with Turning Point USA is that there were multiple Jews at Turning Point USA who felt uncomfortable by the crowd. There are multiple people, like, talk to Charlie Leeds. He's a young guy. He's like, he I think his parents work in politics or something like that. And he will tell you that there were like hecklers, like anti-Semitic hecklers at Turning Point USA that were making anybody who was visibly Jewish uncomfortable. And not just that, there were couples that are basically like, you know, like parents who are like, I'm not sending my Jewish kids to Turning Point anymore because they came back. I mean, there was, you know, apparently Michelle Bachmann, when she said, I support Israel, apparently she got booed. And I mean, I didn't see a clip. This is what somebody told me. And the audience walked out. I mean, really? This is the youth? This is what's happening to the Republican Party?
Well, let me ask you guys this. Given that reality of the crowd, if we alienate and Megyn, justified or not, who else is left for us? Like, what kind of media landscape are we living in if we lose them?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. Unfortunately, it's a speculative question, and I'm terrible with speculative questions.
Well, Karys, I mean, I'd like to explore where that happened, where the discomfort came from, who was speaking at the time, and what that meant. And if that is the climate, I think you make a point that at a certain point, that has to be addressed and be held accountable to at least just honestly address this problem. Now, the thing is, like, I've seen clips this week of Michael. Do you have the clip of Charlie was asked a Q&A, and I think it's worth watching out just for the tone of even this conversation. Watch this episode and just tell me your reaction to this, Karys. I don't know if you saw this. But
they asked about Candace Owens, and I'm a big fan of I was a big fan of her, but she's obviously been going down this anti-Semitic bent. And through her, I'm kind of finding out about these other characters online, like Nick Woods. I'm sure you've heard of them. And these people, they've been active for a long time, and it seems like they've just been ignored, which is working. But now they're kind of surging in popularity. And as someone who I enjoy watching your debates, are they people you'd be willing to engage with and maybe shut them down in a way through a debate or something like that?
Well, I mean, I'm going to debate Candace. But no, look, I'll debate anybody that shows up at our campus, and that's first and foremost. But I do want to take what you say and extrapolate that there is a corner of the internet of people that want to point and blame the Jews for all their problems. Everybody, this is demonic and from the pit of hell, and it should not be tolerated. Really. But it goes to the problem of an entire generation that has economic resentment. They don't own anything. They're not getting married. They're not having children. They're depressed. They're anxious. They're staring at their screens all day long. And all of a sudden, your extrapolation of all that is, well, it's the Jews' fault. That is sloppy and shallow thinking. And not only that, they say, oh, it's the Jews' fault. Okay, let's kind of play this out. Well, tuberculosis, that used to kill about 1 billion people. You know, these are a group of food scientists that came up with the antibiotic that tuberculosis. How about CPR, MRI machine? You know, we're 500 million lives that were saved over the last 50 years because of people that were Jewish scientists that were working on things. They always say thank you to the Jews, but they always say shame on the Jews. Weird how that works. And finally, they always blame the Jews for stuff. Jewish people are an ethnicity. Therefore, definitionally, you have people that are secular, orthodox, religious, that are all over the spectrum. You're trying to blame an entire ethnicity for a singular problem. Hold on, let's take a step back here. Instead of that, what could you possibly do in your own personal life to improve your own state of being? If you are blaming 0.02% of the world's population for all of your problems, that's not going to be good for your soul. It's not good for your psychology. It's not good for your future in any way, shape, or form. And so I would just say this, that any young person that goes into this hyper online brain rot, you are serving yourself over to your own demise. You are serving yourself into a suicide mission that will not make you happier and not make you healthier. Instead, there's your attitude should be. Your attitude, like, I can't own stuff. I got it. Can't own a home. I'm not getting married. I don't know who to date. I said, wow, the challenges are immense. I'm going to now overcome all those challenges and go on an adventure. I'm going to prove everyone wrong. I'm now not going to be a victim. I'm going to be a victor. I'm going to dig deep. This is still a great country. This is a free country. I'm going to use my agency. I'm going to use my ability. And I'm not just going to go point in the corner and be like, I'm overweight because of the Jews. Women don't want to date me because of the Jews. How about this? As Jordan Peterson would say, sit up straight with the shoulders back, follow the rules for life, make yourself interesting, learn something new every single day, and instead of pointing at a small group of people and engaging in this brain rot, become a better person. You'll be a happier and healthier, more joyful and productive person.
Feel better?
It's a little bit disturbing actually to see that clip. I think
Why?
because the back and forth that he's sort of positioning himself as being able to do. Like, I can be your best friend, but I could also be your enemy if I want. It's like it's a little bit. I'm just giving my gut reaction. It's a little bit like scary almost.
He's
Well,
talking
that
about
make
the
any
fact.
sense?
He's talking about the fact that like here you have him saying something that is so eloquently truthful and seemingly genuine, and then he literally can turn around and somebody who calls him an anti-Semite or says they're down the wrong path, he can say to them like, you know what? That's just going to guarantee that I put Tucker Carlson in my TP USA conference every single year, which by the way he has said.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
What do you believe? What do you believe?
I mean, I take obviously.
Thank you.
I take a slightly different approach. I think in one instance he's addressing one audience, in the other it's not. And you could say oh, he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. But in between one clip and another, you could also say he's listening to feedback from people and channeling that maybe from a more refined version of criticism from his Jewish constituency or the pro-Israel side, saying, listen, this is what's happening. It's like what we're talking about. And then somebody presents to him that question. And instead of responding, because the sequence is important, that clip from Megyn was before this. Then I saw this clip. And instead of responding, listen, Jewish guy, stop presenting me with all these questions or I'm going to leave. He says, you know what? And he presents a much more eloquent defense against anti-Semitism. And so all I can say is, I don't think it's both sides of your. I don't think it's as I wouldn't be as ungracious as to say you're just talking out of both sides of your mouth. He's not saying I'm going to become an anti-Semite when he's just saying, practically speaking, I think a lot of people like Charlie and in that space operate from a more speech is better. Sunlight is the best disinfectant ethic and principle. So if you tell me not to talk to Tucker, I'm going to talk to Tucker because ideas, as long as we're not being violent, like we're going to use ideas and we're going to bring Tucker on and Dave Smith on and Josh Hammer, we're going to debate these things in front.
Yes, but he also says, the Jew hatred guys, that just reject it. Don't engage with it. Stuff like that. He always says that kind of stuff.
Yes.
Well, here's somebody there, like, aside from saying the words, I hate Jews, there is no medieval anti-Semitic trope that Tucker Carlson has not resurrected.
Again,
and yet
I agree.
He won't say, he won't acknowledge
I think that's the blind spot I was talking about, and it's real, and I think it needs to be addressed. But Michael, I'm pushing back on this whole idea that he can easily just say one thing and then contradict himself. I think it's actually. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
that feedback gets through, and he presents it in a way that I think is more effective.
I think also the guy who got up at the conference and asked him that question, he asked him a very eloquent, fair, respectful question. He wasn't tweeting at him, go to hell, you're an anti-Semite. So like,
but he also gave him an opportunity to call out Tucker Carlson or even Candace Owens by name, or even Nick Fuentes, who's becoming increasingly mainstream, and he couldn't do it.
Well,
you know what you said? Sorry.
So Michael, what I'm hearing between you guys is like, Karys, you're more like holding people accountable, and Ami, you're more like, hey, practically speaking, we can't hold everyone accountable in the same way because we need them and we need their help and we need their support. So sure, maybe they're wrong, but let's figure out a way to move forward.
I'm not hold Charlie and Megyn accountable in the sense like they're deserving of any sort of blanket condemnation or anything like that. It's just like, I mean, look, we're all like,
I'm just also being empathetic.
If this is how free speech works. If they're going to say something, then we can say something in response. I mean, that's how free speech works, and we're just responding to things they've said.
But I think Ami's more calculating about it because I think bigger picture we need to keep an eye on who our friends and who our real enemies are. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, Karys, like sure, we could do that, but what's the point?
Okay,
I'm also not.
Okay,
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. I was just going to say, I'm also operating from an empathetic place because we're constantly asking for empathy, grace, understanding as to what's going on in Israel with Jews. And if somebody goes off course or does something that we consider objectionable, like operate with a little bit of a place of empathy and graciousness too, if you want to, whatever you give and you receive. So, for example, just like if Michael, I've done a podcast with Michael for many years. I've known him since high school, right? We've known each other since we were like 13 years old. If Michael started going crazy out there in public saying crazy things,
I might.
My point is, I don't think I would make public statements about him, condemning him for years. It would take a long time for me to make some kind of statement.
defend those? Would you defend him?
I wouldn't say I would go as far as doing that, but if
That's
somebody
what they
asked
are
me
doing.
if somebody asked me to comment on it, I could understand me saying, like, I've heard people, and I won't name names, but I've heard people say, like, listen, I think that person's crazy with her, but I'm not going to speak on it. Like, we go too far back. You know, she's been to this event. She knows like people who know each other's families and stuff. Like, there's a public avatar. There's the theater of all this online world that we're in, and there's the personal relationships. So I can understand. I can also understand saying, and I can be having the ability to say, yeah, what Michael's saying out there is crazy. Like, those views are crazy. Those statements are crazy. I'm not going to condemn him. I don't know what's going on with him. But I think we can also have friends that we can acknowledge are crazy. Like I have crazy friends.
You know what I wish?
They need to do that.
You know what I wish Charlie Kirk would do?
Yeah.
And you know, obviously this would have to be tweaked considering the nature of their relationship, which I have no idea about. But I wish he would come out and he would say, Tucker Carlson has said, you know, things on his podcast that are blatantly false and resurrect really the most, you know, vile, guttural, anti-Jewish tropes. I mean, he has, you know, literally been talking to people who say the Star of David has, you know, satanic origins and, you know, Christian children were being kidnapped in World War II, and Israel is controlling all of America's foreign policy, and Jewish supremacy is the greatest threat to mankind, and blah, 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 blah. And Tucker, as somebody who I respect so deeply, somebody who is a friend of mine, like I'm really appealing to you out of love because I feel like you're losing your way. And sometimes when I watch your episodes about things not related to Israel, like most of the time, I still think you're doing tremendous work. But, you know, I mean, this kind of stuff. Yeah. And I mean, it doesn't have to be like cancel Tucker. I mean, you know, like it can be said, but it also takes courage to come up with some sort of nuanced, loving criticism like that. And you know, I mean, look, but again, this is not all we're seeing. We're not only seeing these clips that you're showing. We're also seeing, you know, Megyn Kelly start talking about how she thinks it's nefarious and weird that all these people are trying to get her to go to Israel. Like, that's like her playing into the anti-Israel cultural zeitgeist without her being anti-Israel herself. Like, it's kind of it's a little bit moronic. Like think about what you know about Israel, what you always say, which is that the media lies about Israel. Academia lies about Israel. The UN lies about Israel. So of course, every single Zionist, Christian, and Jew is going to try to get you to go to Israel if you come out as a friend of Israel, because you're a reporter and you have a voice, and we are desperate for like honest representation in the media and desperate for any allies. So for her to frame that as some sort of conspiratorial negative thing, it plays. That's why I say like she's. I think it just reveals playing into this trendy Israel obsession.
The fact that it's met with suspicion reveals just how much the pathology has seeped into the mainstream conversation. And I still think it's like the nefarious actors who put that in, that AIPAC or lobbying or that is met with suspicion. It's to be suspect. I don't even know if she's even realizing that she's playing into that. Sorry, Michael, you were about to also say
no. I think you pointed to something in the clip we watched. Also, they're sort of playing dumb a little bit. They're playing dumb a little bit with like, why is everyone calling me anti-Semitic? Like they're not being quite as sophisticated, smart as we know they are. I think
the question is like, how much of this, you know, intent is willful, mindful versus stepping into, like, you know, playing a game or stepping into a pathology you're not even aware of. That's already there.
They're also kind of not shutting down, but they're rejecting good faith debate on this. And what I mean by that is like in that first clip you showed, I'm pretty sure it was in that clip. In one of the clips I showed, it was with Charlie and Megyn talking. And at some point in that conversation, Charlie says like, look, point out what I've done wrong. Like if I've said something that's not true or false, like I will be happy to engage you about that, but don't call me an anti-Semite. Totally fair point. Charlie, I will have a discussion with you about aid to Israel any day of the week. And this is from somebody who doesn't believe we should send aid to Israel, and you are still lying about aid to Israel, and I will talk to you about that and correct the record. But in that same conversation,
lying or incorrect? Sorry.
That's a good distinction, right? I mean, if it's intentional, then it's lying.
I'm trying to be very careful here because we use words like that. Yeah.
But
loaded.
But then in that same conversation, Megyn Kelly is like saying, yeah, like these people are calling me an anti-Semite and I'm getting all these text messages, and then people say, like, you know, debate this person about this or talk to this person about this. And it's like, no, this is my show. I'm not going to debate anybody. Well, then which is it? Like, if you're open to being proven wrong and correcting any errors you made, whether it's like about like, you know, Epstein being Mossad or aid to Israel or whatever, and you know that this is causing enough of a racket where you have to go on and like talk about this, then like pick one or the other. Either be open to some good faith debate from the people who are criticizing you, not calling you an anti-Semite, but actually critiquing you, right? Or admit that like you're gonna shut people down from any discussion. Like, do you know what I mean?
Of course, I think there's a difference between making requests and making demands.
That's true.
It's just how human beings work. If you make demands of Charlie Kirk or Megyn Kelly, you will be met with defense. And if you make requests and if you come in good faith, you might get something in good faith.
So I didn't know you were such a psychologist. Like, really?
I'm not.
Serious. I'm genuine.
I don't really want to be involved in it, actually. I mean, I am a psychologist. No, but the point is, I try to look at this. I think when you zoom out, we're just looking at a bunch of big kids here. We're all human beings, and as much as people like to say, facts don't care about your feelings, feelings care about your facts. You're not going to receive information from people if you first attack them. You're just going to trigger defenses. And if you don't think psychology is animating all of this, some of it's ideology, some of it's evil, some of it's wickedness, and there's a lot of it is just coded in psychology. And if you make a request of Charlie Kirk or Megyn Kelly, you might get a very different response than making a demand, even if the conclusions or what you want out of it is the same. And that's the conversation I think we're trying to have here. Is I do agree with a lot of the concerns. We all share that. And I'm not even trying to be like calculated. It's just kind of observing what's going on with everyone psychologically, because that's what I think what's going on with this whole thing at its core. Aside from the people who are actual narcissists and manipulators who are playing on that, but you know, and that's kind of how I'm viewing this, which is why I'm trying to just see what's going on here. People can convince themselves of all sorts of things. Say I'm a free speech absolutist, so whatever Tucker says, okay, like let's have him on stage and debate it because that's what we stand for. We can't abandon that principle. Remember, you were like he's abandoning principles. I think in his mind he's probably affirming his principles. Like no, like we're adults here. We can have free speech, and I'm not. And he's missing what you're saying. There's a blind spot there. But
free speech is also labeling people anti-Semitic.
Exactly. So it's like there's a lot of confirmation bias and a lot of psychology here that's reinforcing, I think, defensive positions. That's what we see in that first clip that you rolled, Michael. A defensive position to bad psychology or to you know, a bad vibe.
But there's also people have also pointed out things like apparently there's this like TP was it like a TP pastor or something? There's some sort of like very blatantly anti-Semitic Christian leader that Charlie's affiliated with through I think he's from Arizona, I'm pretty sure, and
okay,
or maybe California, I don't know. But there's other things I've heard that should be investigated. You know what I mean? That should be verified. And like, did you guys see the focus group that Charlie
a little bit
that Charlie did with that was
younger kids?
He was so proud of that, and he sent it out personally to people and was like, you know, this is, I care about Israel, and, you know, I care about the Jewish people. And so I'm going to conduct this focus group with a bunch of TP reps, you know, college reps or whatever. And we're going to sit down and we're just going to hash this out, what the whole issue of Israel was. And it was really interesting. You guys should watch it. And I think that I came away with a very different response than some other people did. I actually was pleasantly surprised by the college kids' perceptions. They didn't seem to be motivated by any sort of animus against Jews, and they seemed, even if they kind of had incorrect ideas about Israel, they seemed to be fairly open-minded to having their own minds changed. But what really bothered me was Charlie. Charlie, like much of the conversation focused on foreign aid and like treating Israel in this like special way. And yet Charlie didn't present accurate information to the kids. So they like these really receptive college kids exited this group with false ideas about aid to Israel that play into these sort of conspiratorial tropes, right? Like this idea that, first of all, this idea that it's aid, right? That it's a blank check, that it can be lumped into the same category as like giving, the 175 billion we sent to Ukraine or something like that, right? Like a lot of this stuff, like he didn't explain to and again, this is coming from a Zionist who thinks that we should that $3.8 billion package that, Obama started to essentially tie Israel's hands and have a leverage over Israel. I think it should end. I think it's been disastrous for America, which is the country I chiefly care about. And it's been disastrous for Israel. That
so now Karys Rhea is an anti-Semite. My God, Michael, we're losing everybody.
That being said, to not explain to not explain when you're having a discussion about aid, the benefits that America gets, and not just like the American military industrial complex gets, not just like the billions and billions in research development that Boeing and whatever saves every single year, right? But also like just the 75,000 jobs that this provides to America. There's this little town in Arkansas, I can't remember the name, and like the people there all work manufacturing for these to essentially to manufacture this artillery and these weapons and everything that Israel is forced to have manufactured in America. So all the money gets reinserted back into the American economy. And because those are the conditions, those are the terms of this so-called aid. And it's also, if you're going to talk about aid with college students and you don't mention the fact that like money is not the only, a dollar sign is not the only measure of expendable resources. What about boots on the ground? Like, do we have any boots on the ground in Israel? No. Do we have 40,000 boots on the ground elsewhere in the Middle East? Yes. Have we still not left Germany since World War II? Yes. So maybe there's other ways to measure, like, how many resources America is expending on other countries, as opposed to like a very superficial like dollar sign. It's just like there's so much we can get into, and Charlie keeps the conversation so superficial that his subjects, if you will, come away being more prone to give into these conspiratorial ideas about Israel, like essentially having like undue foreign influence and like.
It's so interesting. I mean, I think that's a fair critique. I can so imagine hypothetically, like if you presented that to him, he'd say, I am keeping it surface level so I can veer them off the brain rot cliff to say, hey, you can feel a certain way about foreign aid without having to hate Israel. You can be America first without having to say Israel last. Okay, you can disagree on foreign aid. I'm giving you permission to do that because this is such a traumatized generation of kids that we're told you can't talk about anything. You're all racist. You're all hateful. And then they're hearing from this Zionist pro-Israel side the same messaging, and I think he's seeing himself as trying to block that off. That's a racist interpretation.
Well,
but
I don't know,
imagine
because if you watch that clip, he did say things like, now, if you found out that, I can't remember, but he would say things if you guys found out that like the money, that like something happened, blah, 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 would you be more sympathetic to Israel? And then they would be like, yes. And then he was like, interesting. And it's like, but that is happening. Tell your people that is the case. That is how it is. So there were things like that.
Well, it's the left, Karys, that tells people what to think. The right tells them how to think. Just remember, I'm just playing the psychology game. The left tells, there's an aversion to telling people what to think that I think is it to a fault on the right, like nobody, to the absence of standards and accountability. Like we are so free speech absolutists that any speech must not be judged because it's speech. The difference between legal consequences and social consequences.
Wait, who are you being right now?
I'm sorry. I'm being myself.
Oh.
I'm just. I'm just
You're
saying,
like an erudite version of yourself.
This brand of conservative free speech absolutism is expanded to a fault where they just don't judge anything, and I think it leaves room for that kind of sloppiness.
Charlie Kirk, I just have to tell you, is guilty of like the demonization thing too. I mean, remember Charlie Kirk, bless his heart, he is outspoken about the threat of like radical Islam, and he's been so clear about the fact that we the connections between the migrant crisis in Europe and Islamism as an ideology, and how threatening it is to Western civilization and to Judeo-Christian values, blah 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 blah. And yet, during the 12-day war, he like posted this whole thread about FDD, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and talked about like just smeared them as these neocons trying to goad America into war with Iran, when in actuality the FDD is on Charlie's side. There's like nobody in Washington that has done a better job of trying to raise awareness and trying to keep back the influence of Islamist ideology. You know, so it's like, where are your priorities? Are your priorities jumping on the anti-neocon, the anti-neocon train that Tucker has popularized? Or are your priorities actually aligning with people who are trying to fight against radical Islam? And in that way, it is like you're kind of playing both sides.
And just to wrap, we're getting to the end here, but I think that's the reorientation that needs to happen. That there's not this other issue that is trying to distract from whatever Charlie's mission is, or whatever this idea of preserving Western values and principles is. It's in line with it. And in fact, the moral priorities are somewhat backwards. When you're talking about these big threats when it comes to the Iranian regime funding terrorism around the world and the threat of radical Islam, and the temptation is to want to criticize Bibi and Likud, that's the big threat. So I think a reorientation of the urgency and priority is what needs to happen, and I think it needs to happen through the kind of good faith dialogue, by identifying the bad faith dialogue and identifying the people who make the conversations really difficult to have. That, to me, Michael, you can weigh in on this. I think that is where all focus and energy need to be, so that when Charlie or Megyn or anybody in a space that's good faith says something, we know it's not here, but it's those people that are off the cliff, that are nefarious and wicked, that are manipulating a lot of this conversation. And I think just sowing that territory so that we're now playing already in their playground without even realizing it. We're talking about AIPAC, it's suspicious automatically. When you repeat things long enough, that's the pathology we're all now operating in. I think that's where all this reactionary pile-on, slinging mud comes from. I think it comes from that. We're aiming at the wrong target on both ends, Michael?
Well, Karys, to close, I wanted to ask you, you're writing a book, you think about this 24/7, it seems like you have some pretty strong feelings about it. Over the next, let's say over Trump's presidency, where do you see this fracturing on the right going for the Jewish community? How do you honestly assess where it's heading?
Well, I think as long as Trump is leader, I think we're in good, we're safe, for the next few years. But
Third
all
term.
of these people are looking ahead into a post-Trump world. Everybody wants to inherit the MAGA, not the agenda. They want to inherit the the entire brand
Movement.
of MAGA, the entire movement, exactly. And they want to insert their own agenda into it, right? And so the question is who are going to be those inheritors, right? Is it going to be, a Marco Rubio, or is it going to be like a JD Vance? And where does JD Vance stand? There's a lot of question marks about JD Vance. One thing is for sure is these anti-Semites on the right are trying very, 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 very hard to co-opt him, because they're smart and because they're thinking ahead. And has he been co-opted? That could be a whole podcast episode in and of itself. Some people say
who are you talking about, by the way? Because you see the Groypers who are showing J.D. Vance's family next to Gavin Newsom's family.
I know,
and they're saying, look at this airy and beautiful white family, and look at J.D. Vance and his Indian wife and kids. So you're like, they turn on each other too, because it's racist.
Right.
So,
but I don't think that the Groypers are actually in it to position themselves in a politically powerful orientation. I think they're playing the long game with culture. But I think there are people who are thinking more immediately. I think like the integralists, the Christian integralists are thinking more immediately about these things. The isolationists are thinking, and there's kind of some overlap here, but in general, people more focused on the more libertarian like actors and stuff like that are thinking more immediately about this. And I think people like Don Jr. has been very corrupted by somebody like Tucker Carlson. I think, you know, I mean, I think he's very close with Vance, and I don't know, we'll see what happens, but I think we're fine, but I'm quite worried for the future of the right. I mean, I monitored left-wing anti-Semitism for so long on a daily basis, and I never batted an eyelash. I never got emotional from it. And now I'm like sitting here reading all this guttural Jew hatred for my book from people that are supposedly America first and supposedly on the right. And I'm like, maybe I don't have as thick skin as I thought, because I like go to bed crying some nights, and I just like, I can't believe what is happening. Now it's very hard to measure, because you're like, wait, is online is not real life. So what's happening in the real world? But then you're like, wait, no, it kind of is real life, because the youth is online and the youth is the future. Who cares about the boomers? And, you know, I mean, it's so hard to gauge. And even if you're trying to do polls about the youth, which is all very disturbing, all the polls that have been done, it's very hard to understand like the demographics or, you know, the religions behind it and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's a toss up. I have no idea what's going to happen, but we all know that politics is downstream from culture. And if these people are able to change the culture, then I think we could see a future where 10, 20 years down the line, this becomes embedded in this, in the state, and the pendulum could swing again, and, you know, Jews could end up, you know, or the 35% of Jews who voted for Trump could end up reconsidering to be, you know, being Democrats again. Who knows? Who knows?
The good thing about the optimistic one is that the youth are the youth, and then in 10 years they could have vastly different opinions and be swayed by reality or something rather, and rational minds prevail. Because remember, if you polled boomers or middle-aged people married with families and they had those views, you'd be like, holy crap, we gotta go.
That's a great point. What is the saying? It's like, when you're young, you vote with your heart, like everybody's a Democrat, and then you get older, you vote with your brain, and everyone votes with their brain, or something like that, whatever.
If you're not a Democrat in your 20s, you don't have a heart. If you're not a Republican by the time you're in your 30s or 40s, you don't have a brain.
There you go.
But again, if Democrat and Republican both hate Jews, we in trouble. But but again, when you poll youth, right, online and what's real life, that is the thing. And I think also it doesn't take a lot to like co-opt an entire culture or a government or whatever. Right. Like it doesn't have to be the majority of people. It just has to be a very focused coalition. I actually see all this infighting and squabbling on the right paving the way for left-wing populism, for the Mamdanis and the AOCs to come and just take the reins and literally just on a silver platter, we're handing it to them for 2028. And a populist left-wing version of Trump who doesn't like, you know, Israel or Jews or whatever that may be, that's down the pipeline too. So
no doubt.
I'm cautiously optimistic, but I would say, I think we have to keep having the conversations like this that have a combination of grace and holding people accountable, having those standards, not losing them. And it's getting trickier, but I think the real villains here are those nefarious actors that I hope to read about in your book as you detail them. Any timeline on that, or you're in the midst of it right now?
I have such a crazy timeline. The publisher wants me to get this done in I think like 5 months from now. It's like insane. But they also want me to like break news and all this kind of stuff. So I don't know, but I mean, it looks like, it's definitely going to be out in 2026.
Do you have a title yet?
No, I have like 40.
I thought of a good one for you.
Oh yeah.
This conversation, you said that the left manifested the boogeyman that they were so afraid of by criticizing the right. So boogeyman manifested.
I don't like it.
All right, Karys, nice talking to you.
It's great talking to you guys.
That was anti-Semitic. I think boogeyman manifested is very pro-Jewish. Boogeyman manifested.
A for effort, though. I appreciate the thought.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to the final title. Appreciate your efforts.
Where can people find you?
Yes.
I'm active on X. That's where I'm most public
your
about
handle?
my political persuasions. It's just my last name and then my first name. So my name switched at Rhea Karys.
Okay.
Got it.
Follow her on
All right.
X, and we'll follow this conversation closely. Happy to have you on anytime again as this continues to evolve. Thank you, guys.